You know, Rebels, if you've been checking out some of my promotional ads on social media, you'll be aware that I have been using a lot of AI programs to help me create ads. But you know what? There's a lot more uses for AI than just funny little videos. And I'd like to introduce one of our new sponsors, Podium. It is a leader in creating AI tools for podcasters. Now, let's say you've got a podcast, or maybe you're even thinking of doing a podcast. You're probably wondering, well, how can AI be integrated with your workflow? I'll tell you about Podium. As a podcaster, you know that writing show notes and creating chapters and transcribing episodes takes a lot of time, and it can cost you a lot of money too. But you know what? That's where Podium comes in. It's an AI tool designed specifically for creators and podcasters with the goal of making post-production tasks quick and easy. And in just a few minutes, Podium generates show notes, chapters, summaries, clips for social media, a full transcript, suggested episode titles, social media posts, and more. Whew, that's a lot of work for one little program. Your show notes are key to your podcast's success because it helps new listeners find your podcast and they'll know if it's a fit for them. You know, kind of like Too Many Podcasts. It also improves your SEO, that's your search engine optimization. Ooh, big phrase there. And overall accessibility. And with Podium, you can focus on creating a great podcast and let Podium's AI do the heavy lifting. But Podium isn't just for solo creators and podcasters. It's a game changer for editors, producers, marketers, agencies, and production studios. Teams that use Podiums are able to increase workloads, decrease turnaround times, and improve their quality. How does it work? Very easy. First, go to Podium's website, and you'll see that link that's right there in the show notes. You get 3 hours free just to try it. Pretty cool, huh? And using that link also supports this show as well. And you know what else happens? Because I'm a good guy. You use my link, you will get 50% off for your first month. So visit the site, upload an MP3 file, and download your files, and that's it. And if you need anything else, you can use Podium GPT to generate articles and any marketing copy you might need in seconds. Instant show notes, transcripts, chapters for your podcast or channel. This will level up that podcast. So check out Podium today.
The Sherpa's Podcast Picks is presented in cooperation with the SJ Network. If you're someone who would like to appear on podcasts, contact Stephen Joyner at s-j-network.com. We now take you to your award-winning host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa. Actually, it was an award for guessing how many candies were in a jar.
Today's guest on the Sherpa's Podcast Picks is Eugene, from the Geek Saga. I would say if I could be any superhero, I think I'd be Aluminum Man. My superpower would be foiling crime.
Coming to you from Mount Podcastian, this is the Sherpa's Podcast Picks, the podcast about podcasts. Now, here's your host, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpolution, and welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It is the podcast about podcasts and so much more. Jim the Podcast Sherpa coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios in the Sherpa Chalet, high atop Mount Podcastian, where we overlook all the little mountains and mountains of podcasts that are out there. And it's up to me to navigate my way through it with you coming along for the ride. I'm going to find you some good stuff. I promise. This is one of those episodes where maybe this is just a show that you might want to add to your podcast playlist. And that is the goal. Of course, we have goals now. Yes, we have goals. You know, I wanted to address something. Some of you who've listened to Too Many Podcasts for the last 12 seasons, the last 6 years. I'm sorry, 6 years. And you're probably wondering, well, Jim, wait a minute, wait, Sherpa, why the name change now? It's really about helping people find the show a little bit easier. You know, if you do a search for that big search engine that people like to use that rhymes with Flugel, and you typed in Too Many Podcasts, you'd see a lot of different articles that had absolutely nothing to do with this podcast. You would see articles, are there too many podcasts? Oh, help me, I'm listening to too many podcasts, but not this show. You know, just using that word as a phrase, not as a podcast title. So the Sherpa's Podcast Picks, at least if you type in a search for that, you'll see this show, and probably this show only, I'm hoping, and it should help you locate shows a little bit easier. Plus, I think this really captures the spirit of what the show is about, too. You know, I'm checking out podcasts, I'm listening to them, I'm interviewing podcasters, and bringing it all to you to help you decide, you know, do I want to add this to my podcast list? Hopefully, I'm hoping that you do. But anyway, we move on to today's guest. His name is Eugene Lazos. He is a military veteran along with his co-host David, and we got to spend a little time together. And he has a show called The Geek Saga. It is not a geek tragedy, I promise you. And I know you guys couldn't see the video, but there was walls and walls of the Funko Pop statues. I don't know if you've ever seen them before, but Eugene had a ton of them and he loves it. It's definitely something that makes him happy. He's a really fascinating guy, very patriotic, very proud of serving his country. And well, he should be a good man, a good soldier, and a good podcast host. So I spent a little time chatting with him and you get to hear it right about now. Hello there, Rebels. We are here in the Funko Pop room, judging by the background of my guest. His name is Eugene Lazos. He is the co-host with his buddy David of the Geek Saga, a celebration of all things geek. And he has been graciously decided for some reason to join us. Eugene, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. You mentioned Funko Pops. So what your listeners aren't seeing is just what you're seeing is not even a third of what I actually have as far as my Funko Pops. This is just like a small little taste. My house actually has a wall from the back of my couch all the way up to the vaulted ceiling, pretty much. I'm about 2 feet shy, and it's about, I want to say 10 feet wide, and it's just row upon row of pops. So yeah, when you say I'm a geek or I'm a nerd, I'm a collector, yes, I definitely am.
You wear the badge proudly, sir.
Oh, I do. I mean, I've got tattoos on my arms that are, Star Wars and everything else. But I love, everything, pop culture, everything, movies, you name it. I would love it. I dive into it headlong. And especially because being a kid of the 80s, obviously we had the best pop culture references, best movies, toys, you name it. We've had the best of all of it. So
I would definitely agree with that statement, sir.
That's great. You know what? Not too many people do. And I always get the argument, well, the 2000s. I was like, you know what? Let's not even start. There's nothing in the 2000s that is all that great. You cannot compare.
A lot of that fandom builds on previous generations. And I think the 80s really knew how to commercialize a lot of stuff and make things accessible to the masses.
Yep.
They weren't afraid of marketing toys and, collectibles and such. So, and it just kind of built upon that, I think.
Well, our Saturday mornings they just revolved around giant commercials.
That's right.
That's really what it was. It went from the 70s all the way up until they finally stopped with the Saturday morning cartoons, which was in the 90s. It was all just commercials. We were watching 22-minute long commercials for the latest toys that are going to be coming out. And we absolutely ate it up and loved it.
That is very true.
And that's pretty much what the podcast is about. We do dabble into newer stuff that's going on in the news, as far as we have our geek news, and we'll talk about the latest rumors that are going around, latest movies and stuff like that. But we also have a section that we dive deep into geek history. And when I say geek history, we're talking everything that happened in the past all the way to, we probably stop at about before 2020, because after that, forget it. I'm not even going to touch anything else. But it's a lot of fun. Myself and my co-host David, we're two veterans, and we're as salty can get. He's a veteran of 18 years. I'm 14 years and still counting. We're both in the National Guard. So we're still continuing on, counting out those years off so we can retire. And this whole thing just started by us, because we work at Camp Roberts, which is a small little post out in the middle of nowhere over here in California.
Okay.
And we deployed together. We found out that we're huge geeks. He was my squad leader at the time, so we would still talk all this stuff about geek stuff, watch movies and stuff like that, play video games. Then we came over here, and the roles kind of switched, and I became the boss and in charge of security. I brought him in, and we started again right where we started off, or we last stopped. We talking about all the geek stuff. We spend 12 hours together in a shack. And we're like, why don't we record this? It would be a lot of fun to do this. The conversations we had were some of them were ridiculous. And if you don't know what military guys talk like, whew, we go dark, and we go dark from like 0 to 1,000 in a heartbeat, and it's hilarious. But we keep it cleaner on the podcast. But we started recording, and that was about a year ago, a year and change. So that just now has been like getting bigger and bigger and having more fun with it, doing more things. We've gone to different conventions all the way from obviously here at home in LA at LA Comic-Con all the way out to Boise, Idaho to do their comic convention, and just meeting a lot of great people. Because if you don't know this geek community, it really is, it's not just a subgenre, it is literally a community, and people like there's love, literally love in the community for it. And also for everybody that, like, if you're a brand new geek, it's fine. Somebody's right there and they'll just kind of usher you along, help you along, and make you go deeper into it. But it's a lot of fun to do. And it's nothing but love. But as for myself, this is actually my second podcast that I've now produced and hosting. My first one was actually a paintball podcast.
Mm-hmm. Behind the Mask.
Yes, Behind the Mask, exactly. And we did that for 4 years. I did that with my buddy Dennis, who's actually one of my best friends. And we just had a lot of fun with it, talking about one of our favorite sports, which was paintball, even though my co-host David now would say that ain't a sport. That's like an old man thing. You guys just want to pretend to be soldiers. It's like, I am a soldier, so I don't even want to put on that stuff. I play a whole different type of game with it, but it was a lot of fun doing that too. We did the same thing where it was bringing up the latest news on like the tournament scenes. We would go to tournaments. We would interview people that were, whether they stopped playing paintball or new kids that are coming up. We had a lot of fun with that too. So that's kind of where I kind of cut my chops doing this stuff and learning as I went along. And now it's just like, I've got more gear than I even know what to do with sometimes. I've dabbled in so many different programs because I never know which one is going to work just right when it comes to a podcast.
Okay.
And yeah, like it's crazy the amount of things that I've done. I spent money but I'm now starting to narrow it down to like just a few programs that I know, okay, these are the essentials. Okay, this gear, I could probably sell it and move on to something better. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's everything in a nutshell.
So I know when people are passionate about stuff, geek, I think, is maybe like the wrong term to use it, because there's just so, like you said, there's just so much love and there's just so much passion, and there's really nothing geeky about that. But I know usually from all of like the folks that I've interviewed, who have like the geek podcasts, there's always that one debate of contention that either has to do with superheroes or with Star Wars. So what's your big debate point, Eugene?
Mine is more like Marvel versus DC.
Okay.
Because I watch Star Wars and I love Star Wars. My father was a huge Star Wars fan, got me into it. But we also watch Star Trek. And I know if whoever listens to this is going to be like, you can't do both. Yes, you can. Because back when we were growing up, we didn't have Star Wars TV shows like we do now. We had Star Trek. So it is what it is. I stay away from that one. But it's Marvel versus DC. And if you don't know about Marvel versus DC, so the whole thing is listening to Stan Lee, the godfather of everything. He said the one difference between his characters and those of DC is that his were based on humans, like based on a little bit of reality dabbled into his characters. All his characters, if you really read the comic books, have flaws and they're human.
Right.
Even when it comes to like the how they got their powers, whether it's through building a suit like Iron Man or a mutation in the genes like every mutant that is in X-Men.
Right.
Whereas DC, they even have comics that say that they're gods among men and they're unfallible. They're just, you got the bad guys that are obviously those are the bad guys, but then you've got the good guys and they're like gods, like Superman. What you can't really do much. So through the years, they've tried to humanize him a little bit more, but it's the fact that I could relate more with those Marvel characters than I could with the DC.
Right.
So yeah, that's the biggest one that I will jump on it and I'll be like, nope, just stop. Let's talk about this. So.
I really think that's an interesting perspective from somebody who's been in the military too, because I guess you probably, when you join, you have a mindset to protect, just kind of like the superheroes do in that sense as well.
Yeah, and I mean, and I by no means will I call myself a superhero, nor a hero, nor anything like that. I'm a guy that does a job. I put on the uniform. Yes, it's a whole different world when it comes to those of us that are in the military. Now, if you want to talk about a subculture, that's a major subculture because 1%, really only 1% of this country actually has served or is serving. Mm-hmm. It's a really small number. And so there's only so many of us that actually understand what we go through, what we're thinking, how we think, the stuff that we joke about. And as dark as it may be, it's what gets us through.
Sure.
But yeah, it's seeing superheroes put on the uniform and go and do those heroic things. Yeah, it's like, holy crap, that's my escapism. That's what I look at. And as a kid, yes, I did look at that. And again, it was a lot of Marvel characters that I grew up on, and I saw the good that they were doing, despite the flaws that they have. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's to compare it to military. Yeah, I guess there are plenty of heroes out there.
Yeah, well, they I don't think they get enough of the love that they deserve. Right? That's for sure. I mean, I think the fact that it is a small percentage shows that that's a small percentage that really wants to go out and do the job, and that's really what the world needs. When you were growing up, were there certain heroes, superheroes, or movies that just did it for you? That just really said, "Yeah, I can get into this, and I don't care what anybody thinks."
Well, I mean, again, growing up in the 80s, and funny that you mentioned that, we had talked a little bit about movies from the 80s last night on our show. But we had parents that really almost kind of didn't care what we watched. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of like, oh, that's Sylvester Stallone. It's rated R. It's fine. Go and watch it. So I grew up during that time where it was the alpha male type, hero. Whereas now we have not so much that type of hero. It's kind of sad. But I grew up with Schwarzenegger, Stallone. God, who else was around? Dolph Lundgren. Yeah, he came around towards later on in the years.
Bruce Willis.
Bruce Willis. Yeah. Jean-Claude Van Damme. Mm-hmm. Steven Seagal, just for his first 4 movies. After that, I forget him. But I mean, those are the guys that when I was outside, because, back in the day, remember how we used to play outside and we'd run around and get together with our friends and we'd have our toy guns and we'd pretend that we were in that movie or part of the military. And those are the guys that we emulated. Mm-hmm. Those were the heroes that we that we looked up to. And then when it came to the comic books, it didn't stop there because I was drawn more to Wolverine comic books, which he's 5 foot nothing and really hairy, but he's got a freaking edge to him. And then you've got the Punisher was another one that I was drawn to. And then on the other side of the spectrum, I was still reading also Captain America because again, it was that hero mentality that I looked at. Right. I got a little bit of the anti-hero, but I also got a lot of the hero that I loved. So yeah, those were the ones that I grew up watching. And then of course, all the cartoons. All the great cartoons of the 80s.
Sure.
So, yeah. Did that answer it? I mean,
no, that was a perfectly fine answer. So, I'm sure you probably also have your favorite, maybe a top 5 favorite movies.
Ooh, top 5 favorite movies. That's tough because, I'm known for watching really bad movies, and I don't mean they're kind of bad. No, they're bad. You'll find them on Tubi.
Okay.
those ones that were sci-fi movies, sci-fi channel movies. Oh yeah, I love those. But if I had to really think about it and say that if I have a top 5, and surprisingly, number 1 is not Star Wars, even though I have the tattoos and I love it. Actually, number 1 is Back to the Future.
Okay.
I loved Back to the Future. I still love it to this day. I'm really excited to hopefully try to meet the cast because they're going to be at LA Comic Con. Then I would say The Goonies, which the greatest kid adventure that you'll ever see, and it was The Goonies. That was a great movie.
Yes.
Then I would say Star Wars, which we'll start with. Even though A New Hope was the first one, I go back. I would say Empire Strikes Back was more my favorite.
Okay.
And Indiana Jones, and then God, number 5. That's tough. Because I would want to bunch in like all the movies that I really loved it too, which was like Iron Eagle and The Last Starfighter, and there were so many great movies that it's just hard for me to really bunch them in and say, oh, Transformers, the original movie. There we go. I'll round it off with that one.
I would think that's a pretty hard top 5 to argue with, to be honest with you.
I mean, if you can go back and watch them over and over again every month or every year, I mean, it's a classic.
Yeah.
Whereas stuff like I've seen recently, those are just kind of like, they're almost like throwaway movies.
Right.
They pump them out and it's like, all right, I watched it. Cool. I'll watch it maybe, 2-3 years down the line again and say, oh yeah, now I remember that movie. But it's hard to say that there are very many classic movies now. Jurassic Park, Harry Potter, the Harry Potter series, like the first few Marvel movies. Yeah, I could say that they're kind of up there in the classics, but can't beat some of the 80s and 90s stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I was definitely more of a moviegoer during the 80s, I would say, than afterward. There was maybe something about him that just made him so memorable. You had like the uniqueness, and maybe that uniqueness stays with you a little bit better. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here.
I think what it is, and again, it was a subject that actually came up in my podcast because we talked about like 80s movies, and actually movie theaters in general. And that's the difference right there. Movie theaters. How was it back in when we were younger? What was it like? We didn't get the movies pumped out within 3 to 6 weeks after it was in the movie theater, or even get them put on streaming service within a week of it being put out, or even put out at the same time.
Right.
We had to go back and check that newspaper or make that phone call to the movie theater to find out the time. Then we get in the car and we actually physically had to go to the movie theater, buy the ticket because you couldn't buy them ahead of time. And then you get in line with people that all have the same mindset as you do as far as wanting to see this movie. And then once you've seen it, everybody is talking about it as they're coming out. They're not looking down at their phones, typing in whatever is the latest thing, or inside taking pictures of the screen because they're watching the movie. Everybody was excited about the movie. And if you went back again because you liked it so much, because the only way you can get it is to go back to the movie theater, then you got other people that are there too that are talking about the same thing and what part you liked, what part they liked. And we had that interaction.
Sure.
We don't have that. So going to the movies isn't as special as it used to be.
I agree.
So that the thought of that, like what you're saying, what you had said was, I don't know what it was. That's what it was. It was the experience. We don't have that experience anymore, which sucks.
You had a community of people who were anticipating this great thing coming on the screen, where now it's like, well, I'll just look at it my phone, and it just kind of minimizes the whole experience of enjoying a movie. Yeah.
That's what sucks, is that I have to put up with these kids that are in there that are more that, and it's going to sound really bad. So anybody that's listening, I'm sorry, but I hit a note with me when I was at the movie theater. I had a kid that was next to me. She was, and when I say a kid, I mean like somebody that was half my age. So she wasn't necessarily a kid, guys. So relax.
Okay.
I wasn't yelling at a teen. I was yelling at somebody that's probably in their 20s. And I didn't really yell, but I leaned over, and after like the fourth time of her being on her phone and hearing the click, 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 click of her keyboard and the screen completely lighting up, I leaned over and I said, "You're not really that important. Put your phone away." And I just got back to the movie. The phone went away. She was scared. She left. But it sounds horrible. But I was just fed up. I was like, I can't do this. This is stupid. I paid money for this movie, and
Right.
I paid way more money than I should, and I got a kid who wants to talk to everybody else.
Yeah.
So,
I don't get that. Like you said, that joy is gone,
Yeah.
and unless like you go like and you have like a movie theater to yourself, then you can really just get that old feeling back again.
oh yeah, that's why we'll find the very first showing in the morning, and we will go to the movies because there's hardly anybody in there,
Mhm.
and you get to actually experience the movie the way it should be experienced, which is in the dark and 100% focused on it.
Mhm.
So yeah.
So I'm sure you probably have a really interesting podcast playlist. So you want to tell me some of the shows that are on your podcast playlist, Eugene?
Oh man. So yeah, like what got me started doing podcasting was actually Kevin Smith's podcast. So he did Fatman on Batman, which is one of his ones that still is going to this day. He had
Mhm.
Smodcastle. He had SMornings with him and Jay in the morning. And they would just talk nonsense, and it was great. I used to listen to that all the time. Another one that I listened to was Nerd Poker, which is Brian Posehn and his friends. They all got together and they sit down and they play D&D. So all you're doing is listening to a D&D game, but it's freaking entertaining because they do all kinds of voices and have a lot of fun with it. What else? I've got some more on the spooky side of things because that's something else that I kind of like. So I listened to one called Spooked, and they just have people retelling their stories of dealing with ghosts and creatures that we think don't exist, but they do exist.
Okay.
And then the last one is Radio Rental, which is Rainn Wilson.
Yes.
You listen. I love that show.
I've heard it. It's very well done.
It is like even the little in between little blurbs that he does, but before the story start are freaking hilarious. I love when he has his cat. He's talking to his cat Malachi, and the cat's talking back to. It's a great show. They did a really good job with it, and the stories that they actually have on it are really good. So those are all the ones that I started with listening to, and some that I still listen to. But the one podcast that actually helped me get more into the whole geek area was shout out to a buddy of mine, or two buddies, James and Phil, at Distance Nerding.
I've spoken to Phil.
Okay. He's something else, isn't he?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God. I always joke around when we're on the show, like we'll see the Distance Nerding thing pop up as they're in the chat, and it's all like, okay, let's not say Phil's name 3 times because he's going to appear on the show or he'll be chopping it up in our chat. And it's always funny to see which one of the guys I get. I usually get James, but when it's not James, it's Phil, and he is just blowing up my chat. So those guys are great guys, and they helped us get to where we're at right now, actually. So
we have something called shameless self-promotion, and this is where you can let everybody know where they can follow you and get to know a little bit more about the Geek Saga.
So shameless promotion. God, that's a bad thing to let me do because I will just run with it. I mean, if you couldn't tell, I already could shoot my mouth off really quick. But yeah, the best place to find us is across the board you got TikTok, Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and it's all at The Geek Saga. You can also find us at our website, which is www.thegeeksaga.com. If you guys have any information or anything that you want to ask us, if you want to be on the show, if you want to promote yourselves with your events or whatever, by all means, hit us up. I'm constantly checking our DMs on Instagram. I'm also checking the emails like all day long because you never know when something's going to pop in. But yeah, we live stream on Wednesdays at 7:30. It's myself, my partner David, and then we've got 2 new other co-hosts now, Mike and Nancy, they're great people. It's a lot of fun. We just talk all kinds of geek and we talk all kinds of crap along with it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Really sorry. It's just so weird to do this, to be on this end of a podcast. I'm not like, I don't know when to stop. I don't know if I've said too much. It's just really odd for me.
You're fine. So Eugene Lazos, host of the Geek Squad, and we thank you for your time and also thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you, sir, for actually having me on. And anytime you want me to come back, I will babble on for another 45 minutes to an hour if you need just dead air filled.
Now it's time for Sherpa Samples. Got a podcast for the Sherpa to sample? Let us know and we'll mention your name on the show.
Yes, Sherpa Samples, and it is back for season 13. For those of you who had never listened to an episode of Too Many Podcasts, I've been doing this for quite some time, and I definitely carried it over into the new version of the show because I think that it's very important. It is the portion of the show where I tell you a little bit about some of the podcasts that I've been checking out that are on the charts that maybe you just might like. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I don't know what you like. It's not my position in this segment to really review those podcasts, but I will occasionally offer some commentary on certain pods that either I really liked or maybe they did something that I felt was a little bit disturbing. So, and it's just my viewpoints. It's not the viewpoints of Spotify for Podcasters or anyone else who is carrying this show. Just a little heads up. Your opinion can be different, and that's fine. Everybody likes some different stuff, so I can't tell you what to listen to. I can only recommend. So it's time to recommend. Coming up soon in the United States is the 2024 presidential election, and it will be Donald Trump against Kamala Harris. So when that happens, I guess in an election year, a lot of the political podcasts become very popular. And there were 3 that I actually checked out in this group. The Political Scene, Political Gabfest, which is from Slate Magazine, and Assembly Required with Stacy Abrams. And for those of you who don't know who Stacy Abrams is, I believe she's involved with the state of Georgia's government. And that was a really interesting one. She talked about something called ranked choice voting. And I've always been fascinated by that. And she really carried on an interesting lecture on what it's all about and should the United States switch to that as opposed to the form of voting that they're already using. And I guess while we're also talking about history, sort of. There was a podcast called D-Day. I believe it was an 8-part podcast, and it discusses the final battles in World War II with the invasion of Normandy and so on and so forth, and the attack on the Germans way back then. Your basic historical podcast, very accurate, very well told as well. Weird Little Guys. I've been talking so much about the podcasts from Cool Zone Media, and it's about bad people that you've never heard of, where Behind the Bastards is bad people that you probably have heard of. And this one had to do with a Civil War reenactor who was causing all these terrorist problems in the United States, making people think that they were under some sort of terrorist attack. Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon podcast is exactly what you'd expect. That's the prequel, I believe, to Game of Thrones. I've never seen an episode of Game of Thrones, believe it or not. And the hosts interview actually cast members from the show, and they discuss their opinions on what's going on with the episodes as well. Heed the Call is actually a football podcast. I know, I thought it was like maybe a military podcast or something like that. But yeah, no, it is discussions of all things football, which is also imminent in the United States. It's American football, not British football. I know we have this conversation all the time. Is it British? Is it American? It's football, it's soccer, I don't know. But yes, this one has to do with American football. And I think also fantasy football, but I don't think they touched on it in that episode. I could be wrong about that. America's Girls was, I think, released a while back, but it made it back onto the charts. And it is a story about the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. Football, again, right? And really their history and all the things that go on with them. The episode that I listened to was pretty interesting, too. Tells about some of the things that went on in the history of Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. They don't really make a lot, from what I understand, in pay, which is surprising because they were so iconic. But I guess they do it for the love of the game. And hey, if that's what makes them happy, then rock on, folks, rock on. As my buddy Greg Joseph of the Mean Machine Radio Show likes to say, rock on. This podcast will kill you. No, not this podcast. No. Well, I'm not going to come up behind you and slap you in the head with a phone or anything like that. It's a podcast about the things that can kill you. And it's brought to you by 2 ladies. The episode that I caught was about poison control and how it came into existence and what they do. But even a lot of the other episodes, we'll talk about a lot of different diseases and such that have existed throughout history, and they go through it. And sometimes they're very common things, and sometimes they're really unusual stuff. Interesting stuff if you like medical talk and science talk and things that might just be a little bit scary, I guess. And finally, The Squeeze. Now, follow me on this one. Okay. It's hosted by Taylor Lautner. Now, you're thinking that this is the actor who was, I believe, in the Twilight movies. But the truth is, this is his wife. So his wife's name was Taylor, but she married him. So she's Taylor Lautner, and she's married to Taylor Lautner, but she's the host of the podcast. And who is her co-host? Taylor Lautner, the actor. I don't know. I think that podcast will kill me just trying to figure it out. But while I'm still alive, I think we can head right on into the outro.
Be a rebel. Follow the show at Sherpolution on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
A very special thanks to Eugene Lazos of the Geek Saga for swinging by the show. And be sure to check their podcast out on podcast apps everywhere, just like you can hear this one on podcast apps everywhere. And also the Sherpolution YouTube page. No video, as I say, you're welcome. And Sherpolution is the word that you need if you want to follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. I don't think I'm on anywhere else. There's probably nowhere else that will have me. I don't know. And thanks to you for coming on by, and we will be back with more shows. Got a lot of stuff lined up already. As I said earlier, with the new title and the new artwork, I want to try some new things. So we will be hopefully doing some experimenting this season as well. So just stay tuned for that. And until then, I say to you, Viva la Sherpolution.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Pigs. The show is now over. Please be careful when exiting the parking lot. Viva the Sherpolution.